hope you will too. And have a lot to do with a Hasidic Mishnagid controversy and debate that happened about 150 years ago in Lublin. So certain background information is necessary. There was a great man by the name of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. We've all heard of him. He was one of the greatest scholars of the last couple hundred years. And he is born in 1761, passes away 1837 in Posen. He's buried in Posen, and we actually know that he once met up with the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe said a special mimer for him, a long mimer, and those that were there passed over that although Rabbi Akiva Eiger represented the ultimate scholarship and the Mittler Rebbe was a Rebbe, but Rabbi Akiva Eiger was Nisrashim, he was tremendously impressed by the Mittler Rebbe's scholarship, and the Mittler Rebbe was impressed by Rabbi Akiva Eiger's saintliness and piety. Either way, Rabbi Akiva Eiger had a mild stance towards Chassidim. He never came out against us. He was a quiet friend, we would call him. However, you do wonder how his life would have been enhanced, had he been a chassid, because really in learning, he's unbelievable. It's almost like he's unfallible in learning. Doesn't make a mistake, and his crystal clear logic and his depth of mind is just apparent in any work that he ever wrote. He had a son. Whose name was Reb Shloime. Reb Shloime Eiger was also a mighty scholar, an incredible scholar, but he was also a noted misnagid, a heavy misnagid, unlike his father. Reb Shloime lived in Warsaw for a number of years because he married into a family in Warsaw. And Reb Shloime actually, after his marriage, he went into business. He used to learn, and he was a businessman, and he was quite successful. Until some saga transpired in which he lost all his money. And he ended up, he went into the rabbinate. He became a rabbi,
If all else fails.
Like the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted that the Bochrim in Tomchei Tmimim should be acquainted with either Shechita or Milah or Safras to be a Sefer. It's based on Chazal. But the reason the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted it was that just in case, if all else fails, they'll be able to have a backup parnasa. People can't say, you went to yeshiva, no, now you can't do anything. Nah, I'm a sefer, I'm a moil, or I'm a sheikh. You have a backup parnasa. So Shloime Eiger he was a rav in different cities. He himself had a son. His son's name was Reb Leibel. And when Reb Leibel was a kid, he showed signs of genius, a brilliant boy. He grew up in Warsaw because when he grew up, his parents still lived in Warsaw. In Warsaw at the time, there was a young man who was a world-famous scholar already at the time, the Chidushei Harim, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir. Rabbi Yitzchak Meir originally grew up in the house of the Koznitz Magid, Rabbi Yisrael of Koznitz. Yisrael of Koznitz had known the Chidushei Harim's parents, and then he took the Chidushei Harim into his own house, and he raised him. In fact, when the Chidushei Harim was younger, Rabbi Yisrael of Koznitz told him, I want to instruct you in three things. One thing is, every day, Mincha and Ma'ariv, I want you to daven b'yechidus. Mincha and Ma'ariv, you daven alone. Secondly, every day I want you to be mechadish something. Every day needs a new chiddush in learning. Number 3, in the back of your Gemaras, on the Rif, you will find many comments from one of the Rishonim known as the Baal Hamor. Did I tell this once? I told this once. Okay, all right. That was a Thursday night shir. So. But it's quick anyhow. And the Ramban wrote a sefer known as Mulchamas Hashem to defend the Rif from the attacks of the Baal Hamor. Says the Koznitz Magid to the Chidushei Harim, you have a responsibility, a duty, to defend the Baal Hamor from every every argument that the Ramban wrote against him. And the Chidushei HaRim said that was highly difficult to accomplish, but it sounded like he did accomplish it. Anyhow, the Chidushei HaRim was in Warsaw. And he was a chassid. And he had gathered a whole following around him in Warsaw. This Leibel Eger, who was perhaps a young teenager, was attracted to this group of people, and Chassidus was rubbing off on him. When his father, Shloime Eger, got wind that his son is hanging around amongst the Chassidim, he was furious, and he sent his son out of town. He sent him to Misnagdish Yeshiva, one of the big Rosh Yeshivas, and then he also sent him to his own father, Rabbi Kiva Eger. He said, Yezaida, I don't know, isn't it? And he said, Yezaida will deal with you. But Rabbi Kiva Eger was sympathetic towards Chassidim, so Reb Shloime L'chera didn't get his the desired result that he wanted. After a number of years, this Reb Leibel Eger, he gets married in Lublin. So we're talking about the Rabbi Kiva, there was his son, Reb Shloime, the Misnagid, and then now we're dealing with the grandson, Reb Leibel. Reb Leibel went to Lublin, and he married a girl from a wealthy Misnagdisha family. His father couldn't have been happier. Now his son could learn. But when Reb Leibel was in Lublin, he wasn't free from Chassidim. There were many Chassidim there as well. Because not too long before, there was a great Chassidic Rebbe, Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak Horowitz, the Chayz of Lublin, who had passed away. He actually passed away a year before Reb Leibel was born. So Reb Leibel never saw him. The Chayz passes away 1815. Reb Leibel's born 1816. So Reb Leibel never saw him. But
he was also in Warsaw,
right, he was also in Warsaw, exactly. But there were many Chassidim in Lublin. You see, just a little bit of some more history over here. The Chayz of Lublin did something highly remarkable and difficult to understand. While his Rebbe, Rebbe Elimelech of Lizhensk, was still alive, the Chayz broke away and started his own court while his Rebbe was alive. Well, the same thing happened to the Chayz himself. While he was alive, he had a student with the same name as him, Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak, from Pshischa, known as the Yid HaKadosh, the Holy Jew. The Yid HaKadosh broke away from the Chayz while the Chayz was alive. Intriguingly, the Yid HaKadosh passed away before his Rebbe, right before. The passing of the Chayz of Lublin is a remarkable, fantastic story on its own right. The Rebbe once made mention of it. He was trying to bring Mashiach. I don't know if it was on. Actually, it's a long story in its own right. But either way, after the Yid HaKadosh passes away, shortly after his own Rebbe, the Chayz passes away, and then ultimately that line of Chassidus ended up in the hands of Reb Simcha Bunim of Pshischa. Reb Simcha Bunim of Pshischa. And many of these Chassidim, they were Chassidim that were living in Lublin. So Reb Leibel Eger was rubbing shoulders with these Chassidim. After Reb Simcha Bunim passed away, he was succeeded by Reb Mendel of Kotsk. So you had the Chayz of Lublin, the Yid HaKadosh of Pshischa, then Reb Simcha Bunim of Pshischa, and then Reb Mendel of Kotsk. And this Reb Leibel Eger was attracted to the Kotsker while he was living in Lublin, while he was married into a Misnagdisha family. His father, Reb Shloime, heard about it. At some point, his father sat Shiva. At some point, Reb Shloime Eger's recorded he sat Shiva for the fact that his son joined the group of Chassidim. He even traveled to Kotsk to try and bring his son back home, back to the fold. The son didn't want to go, but his Rebbe, Reb Mendel of Kotsk, convinced him, Reb Leibel, you got to go. He went back to Lublin. His shver wanted him to divorce his wife. It was a whole maisa. Baruch Hashem, he was able to stay married, but he remained a fervent chassid.
Was his grandfather still alive, Rabbi Kiva Eger, at this point? Was he involved in any of these things or no?
Not that we know of.
Probably
Not that we know of.
not.
Apparently there's a letter where he... I once heard there's a letter that he wrote to his... allow.
Good.
Yeah. He was okay with it. Reb Mendel of Kotsk, in the last 20 years of his life, he was almost a hermit, unfortunately. And very few people were able to see him. He almost remained in his house, in his room the entire day. So one of his chassidim, Reb Mordechai Yosef Leiner, opened up his own shop known as Ishbitzer Chassidus. While the Kotzker was alive, history repeated itself, and Ishbitzer Chassidus was created. And Reb Leibel Eger joined the Ishbitzer Rebbe. He left the Kotzker to join the Ishbitzer, who had been the Kotzker's Talmud, and this was while the Kotzker was alive.
But he was, while he was alive, but secluded.
But he was secluded. He was secluded. Exactly. It happened again and again.
The Kotzker was known for short.
Right. That was even while he was talkative. Imagine when he wasn't
Sharp,
talkative anymore.
Sharp
Anyhow,
lines.
the Ishbitzer then passes away also while the Kotzker is still alive. Reb Leibel Eger wants to go back to Kotsk, and lots of people don't let him. You want to come back? When it was convenient for you, you went to Ishbitz. Now that your Rebbe is no longer, you want to come back? He ended up opening up his own shop in Lublin. Reb Leibel Eger became a Rebbe in Lublin. So now we're in the year 1865. Reb Leibel Eger is a Rebbe in Lublin. He has hundreds and more thousands of followers. He's a highly magnetic personality. Lublin. He has Sfarim. Torah Semes, he has Sfarim. Anyhow. So what was the controversy? So here we go. Reb Leibel Eger was known to daven in unconventional times. He was davening Shachris very late. Who knows when he davened Mincha and Ma'ariv? In fact, his father, Reb Shlomo, once wrote to him, "What are you doing? Don't you remember what you learned when you were younger about davening the Zmanim of Tefillah?" And Reb Leibel wrote to his father, "Tate, I don't serve the sun and the moon and the stars. I'm not an Ovid Kechav Mazalos. I don't serve the sun. I don't serve the moon. I don't serve the constellations. You have to daven when the sun is this part of the sky and the mincha before the sun reaches over here. I don't serve the sun." That's what his Chassidic retort to his father was. Anyhow, but there was a practice that he had. He was a moil. And all of his chassidim wanted him to mal their kids. But he couldn't mal first thing in the morning. It took time. It took lots of time. He was preparing, he was mizbeinen. It took a lot of time until he was ready to do the milah. And it would happen way late in the day, sometimes close to Shkia. So, there was a Misnagdish Rav in Lublin, whose name was Rabbi Yeshua Hershel Ashkenazi. And this Rabbi Yeshua Hershel Ashkenazi was highly unhappy with the practices of Rabbi Leibel Eger. And in the year 1865, he wrote poster signs and plastered them around Lublin. And and he says like this, he says, really, I don't want to get into this, I'd rather do my own thing, but I am the rabbi of the city, and therefore I'm obligated to speak up. He says, I'm not mentioning by name, there are those that have wild practices concerning Bris Milah, and instead of doing it early in the morning, they have no problem in delaying it to late in the afternoon. And he said it's a shanda, we can't have this happen. And he has 3 arguments. And here we go. He starts with number 1. Number 1, it's a Gemara in Psachim Daf Daled Amud Aleph.
This old man, he's
says
so sensitive.
Says the Gemara, Psachim number 1. Dichsiv ubayayim hashmini yimol b'sara losai. So you're wondering, what does it have to do with this week's parsha? Parshas Lech Lecha, when the mitzvah of Bris Milah was given. That's the connection to this week. The pasuk says in Parshas Tazriah that on the 8th day, Yimol Besar Losoi, the flesh of the Arla has to be circumcised. V'tanya, there is a brisa that says the following: Kol Hayom Kulei Kosher L'Milah, the whole day is kosher for Milah. Ella, however, Shezrizin Maktimin L'Mitzvahs. Those that are Zoris, those that are quick. Makdim in the mitzvahs, they bring the mitzvah earlier. Shenemra, as we see, Vayashkem Avram Baboker. By the Akedah, Avram woke up early in the morning. First thing. So that's what the Gemara says, and this is brought in Shulchan Aruch. Even though the whole 8th day is kosher for Milah, but first thing in the morning is the way it's supposed to be. So Rabbi Yeshua Heshkel Ashkenazi writes, listen, you can't get any clearer than this. You can't push off a bris milah. First thing in the morning, you got to do it. Okay. That's number one. Number two, he says, we know a story in Parshas Shmos that because Moshe was lax, Moshe had a cheshbon, but ultimately he pushed off the milah of his son, and therefore Moshe was almost killed. The snake came and swallowed him up, as the pasuk says clearly in Parshas Shmos. So it says Rabbi Yeshua Heshel Ashkenazi, Moshe Rabbeinu had good reasons to push off the milah. It was a sakana, right? He didn't want to mal his kid and then travel. Moshe had good reasons to push it off. Yet the Eibishter had, the Eibishter held him accountable. And you have this rabbi who was just sitting there and communing with the Eibishter. He's being misbein and he's contemplating about God and pushing off the milah. How do you explain that? Too late in the afternoon? You're pushing off the milah. And the third issue he had was like this. There is a din that on Friday you're allowed to wash and have a meal in the morning until the beginning of the 10th hour. But an extra large suda, a mishta, a feast that you don't usually have, you should not ever have on a Friday, even in the morning. It's not respectful to Shabbos to come in full. So, what do you do by a bris milah? You don't have a choice. You have to do it Friday, so you make the suda Friday. But says Yeshua Heshel Ashkenazi, obviously you do it the first thing in the morning. Really shouldn't have a meal Friday. Elamai, you have no choice, so do it as early in the day as you can, in order not to impede on Shabbos. And he says, and yet you have these bris milahs that happen late Friday afternoon. They have these sudas right before Shabbos. He says there's nothing more disgusting than entering Shabbos with a full stomach. It's like a mashal that, imagine you haven't seen one of your parents for a while, and they call a good friend. They come to visit you, and you arrange to go out to eat, and you go to the restaurant, and you're catching up, and your parent is ordering, or your child is ordering, and you say, "No, I just ate before." It's highly offensive to Shabbos. Highly offensive to Shabbos. So these were his three issues. Number one, the Gemara in Psachim. Number two, Moshe Rabbeinu was punished. Who does this person think he is? And number three, you have meals late Friday afternoon. And therefore he says, I have to be moicha. I have to take a stance against this. That's what he says. It was directed at Reb Leibel Eger, although he didn't identify him, because Reb Leibel Eger was the person that year who was doing this. In addition, we have a letter where Bishul Heshel Ashkenazi does identify Reb Leibel Eger by name about this. So it was directed to him. When the Misnagdisher rabbi of the city came out against Reb Leibel Eger, you can be sure that all the Misnagdim in the city took the opportunity to piggyback and jump on the bandwagon and make life miserable for Reb Leibel Eger. So he turned to some of his friends and he said, "Guys, help me out." So one of the letters he wrote to the Chidushei Harim. The Chidushei Harim was older than him by about 20 years, a little less, but he had tremendous respect for the Chidushei Harim, who was a goin in learning. And Reb Leibel Eger asked him, "Please, I'm in dire straits. The world is harassing me. What can you say in my defense?" By Reb Leibel Eger, when he would write these letters, he said, "I know I'm right. I have my justifications, but they can't hear it from me. I'm biased. They got to hear it from somebody else." The Chidushei Harim wrote back that, I don't get it. The Gemara in Psachim says the whole day is kosher for milah. It's just zrizin makdimin. The Brisa doesn't say you have to do it in the morning. Faket, the Brisa says the whole day is kosher. It's just if you're Zorish, you do it earlier. In other words, the same Brisa that's teaching you should do it earlier starts off by saying let's get everything straight. The whole day is kosher. So how could anyone have a taina to you that you're doing something wrong by postponing it? Concerning which, let's look at number 4 for a moment. This is a comment of Rabbi Yosef Engel in his commentary, Gilyonei Hashas, on the Gemara in Pesachim. So, this is number 4. D'chsivu b'yom hashmini yom, on the 8th day you do the milah. Nun beis mis nichtav b'tzidah is written on the side of his Gemara. Look at the tshuvas of the Radvaz. Chelik beis siman 6:14. The Kosav, the Radvaz says like this. Radvaz was a great, one of the greatest of the Poskim 500 years ago. The Chsiv, it says, I was telling Rabbi Korf yesterday, that there's a debate if the Radvaz lived for 95 years or 110 years. We don't know exactly when he was born. We do know that he lived his last 20 years in Svas, and he had a whole career in Svas. So those that believe he was 110 maintain that his whole career in Svas started when he was 90. So B'chlal, life starts when you're 90. You know, life can begin then. Anyhow, the Radvaz says, "U'b'yoyim hashmini yimo mashme ichur." The Radvaz says a fascinating thing. On the 8th day you do the bris. It's mashme dafka late in the day. Dafka ichur dafka late. Va'afal pikein. But nonetheless, even though the pasuk seems to do it later in the day, still we learn from Avrom's risen makdimin. Ayin shom sidev v'tzarch bir. What does Radvaz mean? Then he quotes the Meiri in Yuma Daf Chav Ches Samad Beis. Here's a very important statement of the Meiri as one of the Rishonim. The cost of the Meiri writes like this: Kol Hayom is kosher for milah. Mikol Makam, nonetheless, says the Meiri, it's roy, it's fitting. There's no obligation, it's fitting. Lezrizim lahaktim ba b'shachris, to be maktim in the morning. Shelo yeror k'misrashel ba mitzad chem losei ala ben. The Meiri says if you push off the milah, it almost sounds like you can't bring yourself to cut the kid. The Rambam actually writes in Mer Nevuchim, you know why you do the milah so soon to birth? And why is Dafka the father? He says because while the baby is in the mother's stomach, the mother's very much attached to the kid. What shaykhs does the father have, you know? It's like, so, no, I just had a baby. You didn't have your wife had the baby. You're a passive...
observer.
If you had to do the milah a year later, imagine how attached the father would be to the kid. So if you do it a week after the kid's born, says the Rambam, the father doesn't yet feel such a closeness to the kid, he's okay to go ahead with the procedure. But once feelings are created and it's nurtured a close as father and son, it'll be much harder. Anyhow, along similar lines, says the Meiri, if you would push off the milah to the end of the 8th day, it would seem like you're not really ready to perform the mitzvah. So therefore, particularly by bris milah, it appears, you should be oiches darchi ha'avos, the path of the forefathers, that it says about them, Avram woke up early in the morning. That's what the Meiri says. Mashma midvarov, says Rabbi Yosef Engel, seems from him, the Zerizin Makdimin is not a chi of gomer. It's definitely not an obligation. The Meiri says, right, it's just fitting. In addition, the Inyan is rak mip'as, because sharoy la'adam lechas b'darchi avos. You should follow the forefathers. So it could be dafka by milah when there's a concern that it may appear you're not ready to do the mitzvah. Secondly, the Meiri just says it's nice to follow the paths of the forefathers. That's what it is. The ilu, perhaps time or maybe that why doesn't the Meiri learn it's a real mitzvah? Because ein lameid in mekaydim matan Torah. First of all, we know that the general rule, although there are many exceptions, anything which is written in the Chumash before the story of the Torah being given is not something we learn from now. The issue with that is many Achronim hold that anything which is logical we can learn from. Like the fact that ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, we don't mix two simchas together. Like Lavan told Yaakov, okay, you married Leah, let's finish the celebrations, then you'll marry Rachel. We learn from there you can't mix two simchas together. It's written in Vayetze before Matan Torah. So Achra, the Shvus Yankov says, listen, anything which is logical you can learn out. So you would assume Zrizin Makdim in the mitzvahs is logical. You know, it's logical. You would learn it out. Nonetheless, says Rabbi Yosef Engel, this may be the reason of the Meiri. V'gam, in addition, Lo nema b'Torah's chiv. It's not written as obligation. It's Sarach Lasses Kain. The Torah never said you have to. It's just telling what Avram did. Rak HaKosav Sipper that Avram did it. Va'al Kain, therefore, in Yana, according to the Meiri, is only that it's fitting to take the path of the forefathers and do what Avram did. V'gam also, Yotzim Midvara, that it's Chiddush Demila, that it's there's something unique by Milah. Yesh oid chiyav prati lahaktim shelo yirakim israshel. It's really more by Milah than anything else, because it shouldn't be a period that you're not interested in the mitzvah.
We learn everything out from this mitzvah.
So right, that's but in the world of the Meiri, it's not so clear. In the world of the Meiri, you see two things. A, there's no chiyuv. It's nice to follow the patterns of Avram. Secondly, it's mainly by Milah. According to the Meiri, it would seem like by other mitzvahs, it really wouldn't be a big deal if you do it in the correct time. But at the end, no, nish gefährlich. Then he just finishes off underneath. The Radvaz that we began with, the Kosav ubeyoyim mashme icher, that in the day really means later in the day. In his cart, he says, I remember the chenu barashi yuma. It's a Rashi Masechta Yuma. Rashi writes there, beyoyim. It's a short Rashi, and lucky that he remembered. Rav Yosef Engel was a Baki, incredible genius, and
he still has 14 blood a day.
that's right. Yeah, and Rabbi Teitelbaum's father used to spazier. He used to walk with Rav Yosef Engel. Yosef Engel passed away in 1920. Your father would have been already 20 or something, right? 21 maybe. Right. So Rashi writes, "B'yoyim mashma ba'er itzum hayoyim v'loy b'boikroi." Rashi says when it says b'yoyim, it means during the day, not at the beginning. Fascinating.
Where
Rashi.
did he live?
Somewhere in Galicia. In Krakow. In Krakow, I think.
Where did he live, Rabbi Teitelbaum?
I know where he lived, but when he was for a
He was
time
in
he came
Krakow.
to Vienna.
He was also in Krakow. Anyhow. So it's that means, according to the Radvaz, really Milah should be dafka later in the day. We learned from Avram to do it earlier. You know, there's a well-known psak of Reb Chaim Brisker. Reb Chaim Brisker said, if you have two kids in front of you, okay, one of them is a month old, but for some reason didn't have a bris yet. The other one, today is his 8th day. Which one do you do first? Which kid do you mal first? So as usual, the stories of Reb Chaim go, everyone said one thing and he said the other. Everybody said, listen, you do the one who's the 8th day, because it's his ma. The other guy anyways is a couple of weeks late. At least yeah, in other words, the other guy's late anyways. What's the difference, an hour and 6 hours? But the guy who's today's the 8th day, you got to do like Rizal Makdim and do it right away. Reb Chaim said just the opposite. Reb Chaim said the kid who's a month old, every single day, there's a prohibition of chorus that stands upon, well, the kid's a kid, but as far as the nullification, the postponement of the mitzvah of milah is much more serious for him, because it's already past the 8th day, whereas the kid who today's his 8th day, he has a whole day. He has a whole day. If you do it later on in the day, the mitzvah has not been neglected and pushed off. It's the correct time. You have the whole day to do it. So Chaim said, Dafka, the other kid comes first. Because the other kid's already, beyond the red line. He's already past, the urgency is much greater for him. The 8th day kid, what's the urgency? You could do it later. You're not being mavato the mitzvah if you do it later. That was his psak.
You're talking about a few minutes.
Even if it would be a few hours. Even if it would be a few hours. As long as it's the same day, B'chaim gave the same psak. Which l'chayra means as well, that if you don't do the bris the 8th day in the morning, you push it off to the afternoon, nishkefelch, it's not considered being mavato the mitzvah in any way, shape, or form.
It's more important for the kid that's past the 8th day.
Exactly. So that would be a, that would go in the lines of this Meiri and go in the lines of the letter the Chidushei Harim wrote to his friend Reb Leibel to defend him. Listen, it's not so bad if you push it off, and if you want to because you feel you'll be more prepared, go right ahead. That was one thing. What?
Besides the Baruch that does it later in the day?
Oh, okay. Well, we're hearing in Lublin. So, okay. Before we go to the next thing, we have to know like this. The idea of Zrizin Magdim in the mitzvahs, that you do the mitzvah at the earliest opportunity, that idea finds itself in Gemara in a number of places, and the Gemara cites different rules. They all seem to be heading in the same direction. But the Gemara has 5 different ways of referring to this idea that you do the mitzvah ASAP. One of them is mitzvah b'shaita chaviva. The mitzvah at its right time is precious. if somebody did a certain Aveira, there are certain Aveiras that depending on your financial status, that will be what atonement you bring, whether you bring flour, a bird, or an animal. If somebody was poor when he did the Aveira, right? So he brings a cheaper kapara, a cheaper sacrifice. Or he brings, even if he's poor, he brings flour. The shaila is, but the guy can get a job today and he can make some money, and then tomorrow he can bring a much nicer, he can bring a better carbon. The Gemara says, no, we don't do that. Mitzvah, b'shaita, chaviva. Do the mitzvah at the right time, even though it won't be, you could do it better tomorrow. There's another din of mitzvah b'shaita chaviva. It's a Gemara in Psachim. Shabbos. You shecht animals on Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash. Exactly. The fats, the chalavim, the fats, and the limbs of the oila technically could be brought mitzvah Shabbos. As long as they're consumed, as long as they're on the mizbeach before Sunday dawn, then it's okay. Yet we put them on mizbeach on Shabbos. You're burning, you're cooking, you're mavashel. How could you do that on Shabbos? You could do it mitzvah Shabbos. Says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, no, you see from there, doing the mitzvah at the earlier time, b'shaita, at its first opportunity, is so precious that it entitles us and enables us to break Shabbos. So that's one idea. Mitzvah b'shaita chaviv. Mitzvah at its early time, at its initial time, is very precious. That's one thing. The other one is rizin makdim in the mitzvahs, that we saw. But there's a few others. One of them is called shihui mitzvah loy mashihinon. It's a Gemara in Yevamis, and it speaks there. Reuven's married to his wife. Unfortunately, Reuven passes away. He has two brothers. One of them is here, and he's not willing to do yibum, to do the levirate marriage, to marry the woman, but he's happy to do chalitza, and then she can marry somebody else. We know, though, that al pi Torah, the mitzvah of yibum has precedence to chalitza. Better to marry her than to divorce her and send her away. Already, since the times of the Gemara, the Ashkenazim always did chalitza, not yibum, and the Sfardim still did yibum, but that's based on a whole sugi in Yevamis. As far, though, as the Torah is concerned, yibum is definitely more preferred than chalitza. But here's the deal. The brother that's ready to do yibum isn't here. He's coming back in a month. The brother ready to do chalitza is here. The Gemara says in Yevamis, it says a svara, better do the chalitza now. If you wait, you can get yibum and you can strike gold. Shihui mitzvah loy mashina. We're not going to delay the mitzvah. Chalitza is also a mitzvah. Who knows what's going to happen in a month? We don't delay mitzvahs. So that's another idea. We don't ein mashin es ha-mitzvahs. We don't delay mitzvahs. Or the way the Gemara says it, shihui mitzvah. Delaying a mitzvah, loy mashina, we don't do. So that's another idea. That's number 3. Number 4 is a term we're probably familiar with. Ein machmitzin es ha-mitzvahs. You can't let a mitzvah become chametz. Where's that from? Rashi quotes it in Parshas Boy. The pasuk says, "Shmartem es hamatzis." You should watch the matzis, make sure they don't become chametz. So the Mechilta says, don't read matzis, rather mitzvahs. You should watch mitzvahs. Make sure the mitzvahs, don't become chametz. Don't let it rise. Chap right away. Pounce on the mitzvah at your first opportunity. Ein machmitzin es ha-mitzvahs. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim writes, whenever Chazal say, don't read it A, but read it B, it's just poetic. It means the halacha that the Chachamim are teaching is only from the rabbis. It's midrabanan. It's not min ha-Torah, it's midrabanan. But they found a pasuk to hinge it on and to give it a poetic, so you should remember it and give it some substance. They said, don't read A, but read it B. That's the Rambam's opinion. Not everyone agrees. Others hold that it is biblical. But that's the 4th idea. The 5th one is maybe the most famous, is known as Ein Ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. You can't pass over a mitzvah. And this is mentioned in Gemara many times. Many times. You can't pass over a mitzvah. And this is the most serious. You see, Ein Ma'avirin ala mitzvahs means if you have one mitzvah in front of you and you're able to perform it, don't pass over it to do a different mitzvah. By that, it means dafka to do a different mitzvah. But if you want to pass over the mitzvah to drink a bottle of Coke, that's not a problem. It's dafka to pass over the mitzvah to do a different mitzvah. And it's the most serious. It was because it was said in the negative. Don't pass over a mitzvah. It's disgraceful to the mitzvah. It's disgraceful to the mitzvah. Now, when it comes to ein ma'avirin ala mitzvahs, how serious? Let's just see where the Gemara brings it up. The Gemara, in fact, in Megillah, Daf Vav mentions that when you have two Adars, when do you do Purim? The first Adar or the second? So it's machlokes in Gemara, machlokes Tanoim. One opinion says we do it in the second to juxtapose it to Nisan, which is Pesach, another Yom Tov of redemption. But the other opinion says no, we do it in the first Adar, at the first opportunity. Because if you don't, you're past ein ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. He uses the term ein ma'avirin ala mitzvahs, which is interesting because if you choose the second Adar, you're not mamish passing over Adar Aleph. It's passive. So actually, the great Shagas Aryeh wrote another sefer in his older years, right? Which we said wasn't that. It's no, when he went to France, because he was taken care of by the community then. He was more comfortable, so Chaim Brisker said it's not the same quality as his earlier sorting. But nonetheless, the Shagas Aryeh is one of the greatest of the great, and he wrote a sefer on some Masechtas called Tudei Oven, and on the Gemara there he proves that the Gemara Taka doesn't mean that if you choose the second Adar, you're mamish passing over the first Adar. The Gemara just used that term, but it's not. It doesn't have the severity of ein ma'avirin ala mitzvahs at all. And he has a long piece about that. But this is an idea the Gemara mentions many times. The Gemara in Yuma says about tefillin. Okay, now what does that? Now that you mentioned, what does that mean? There's a big debate between Rashi and Tosfos what that means. The Gemara says about shel yad and shel rosh ein ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. What does that mean? Rashi says, why is it that you first put on the shel yad and then the shel rosh? Why do you do that? Maybe the shel rosh should come first. We have a rule, whenever you have two mitzvahs in front of you, whichever one is holier you do first. Since the shel rosh is holy, maybe that should come first. So Rashi says, no, you know why I do the shel yad first? Because when you lift up your hands, first your hands will reach your biceps before they reach your skull. If you put the shel rosh first, you're being ma'aver on the shel yad. That's what Rashi says. Tosfos says that's inaccurate. There's a different reason. It's because the pasuk says "Ukshatam la'isal yadecha," first on your hand, then your head. That's the reason. And therefore, Tosfos, what the Gemara means is something else. The Gemara means when you put your tefillin away, don't pack the shel yad first and then the shel rosh on top, because the next morning, what are you going to do? You're going to have to pass over the shel rosh to get the shel yad first. So you can't pack up your tefillin that way. So there's debate, Rashi, Tosfos, what that Gemara means. Anyhow, this idea comes up often in Gemara, and it's highly serious. In other words, Zerizin Makdim in the mitzvahs, okay, we saw the Chidush Yarim, we saw the B'yos Fengelman before. It's much looser. In fact, all the other four ideas are much looser. The Shiyui mitzvah, loy mashinon, don't delay a mitzvah. Mitzvah b'shait is chaviv, or don't be machmitz the mitzvah. None of these are as serious as ein ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. Ein ma'avirin is the most serious. In fact, there is a debate if ein ma'avirin is biblical or rabbinic. The Levush, the great Levush, Reb Mordechai Yaffa writes clearly, ein ma'avirin is a isur min haTorah. It's a isur min haTorah. In fact, there's a whole shaila then. If you do pack up your tefillin and you put the shel rosh on top of the shel yad, what do you taka do? Do you taka pass over the shel rosh to put on the shel yad first? Why? Because the Torah says first the yad and then the rosh. But according to the Levush, the Torah also says you can't pass over a mitzvah. So there's a whole discussion. Rabbi Yosef Engel has a whole arichas about that. But the Levush holds ein ma'avirin is biblical. He's not the only one. The Chaye Adam. The Chaye Adam was a big misnagid, but a great scholar in times of the Alter Rebbe. And he wrote a Shulchan Aruch, his own Shulchan Aruch called Chaye Adam. And he has a lot of halachas about this, about not being ma'aver on mitzvahs. And he also contends, he believes it's min haTorah. The Radvaz holds in the tshuva that it's only rabbinic. It's only rabbinic. So there's a debate about the source and how serious it is, but nonetheless, it's a serious halacha. You can't pass over mitzvahs. Having said that, let's read number 2. Number 2 is a couple halachas from the Alter Rebbe over here. Let's do this quickly. The Alter Rebbe says, if you put your talus and your tefillin in one kiss, be careful that you don't put the tefillin on top. Because before we spoke about the shel yad and shel rosh, But between talis and tefillin themselves, if you put the tefillin on top, you can have a problem. What's the problem? The next morning, you're going to bump into your tefillin first. Now, what do you do then? So Alter Rebbe says like this. If the tefillin are going to be open and out of their case, you should put them on before the talis. If they're still in their case, better to pass over them to put on the talis first. Why is it important to put the talis on first? So there are a number of reasons to the Rishonim. The Alter Rebbe chooses the reason because talis is more of a constant mitzvah because it applies on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So you want to get that talis on first. It's tadir, it's more common. Whatever's tadir takes precedence. But if the tefillin were placed on top and they're out of their case, you can't pass over the tefillin. Ein ma'avirin is more important than getting the tadir first. But if the tefillin is closed in their case, so you're not really being ma'avir to the fullest extent, then it's better to pass over the tefillin to get the talis first. So what do you see from this halacha? If the tefillin are open, you have to put them on first. You want to get the right order of tadir of the more common mitzvah first. Doesn't matter. You can't pass over the mitzvah.
When you take out the shalveish first, you have to go. You have to put on the.
Right. We asked her why. We asked her why. So I said there's a raised angle elsewhere. Why ein mavirin?
There's another pasuk.
Yeah, but even there's two psukim, so they should. No, but even so, why would you actively?
The pasuk says that.
Yeah, but the pasuk says ushmartem es hamitzvos.
You have to have when you put on the shoulder.
But there's another pasuk you can't pass over mitzvahs. I said that Rabbi Yosef Engel has a well-known kasha elsewhere. If you hold ein mavirin as deraisa, then why would you put down the shalosh to get the shalyad first? There's psukim going in both directions, and he has a whole explanation. Not for now. The Alter Rebbe then Halacha Dalet takes it a step further, and he says, even if you don't have the tefillin in your hands, the tefillin are chveis. They're in the room, right? It's 9 a.m. In 2 hours, you're going to get a talis. Is it better to wait 2 hours so you can get the talis, so you can do the correct order of operations, talis first and then tefillin? Or perhaps no, maybe it's better to do the tefillin now. What two rules are at play? So here it's not ein ma'avir. Now, look, he writes in number dalet. The chayin sotu, the tefillin are ready in your hands, not literally in your hands, but they're near you. And the talis is not mezuman. You don't have to wait for the talis in order to put it before the tefillin, in order to get the correct order of operations. Rather, put the tefillin on right away. When the talis comes, you put it on. Because ein mashin es mitzvah. This is the other rule of you can't delay a mitzvah. Even though you might be able to do it better later, because you'll get the correct order of operations. Nonetheless, mitzvah b'shaita chaviva. So here the Alter Rebbe is quoting not ein ma'avirin, but two of the other rules. The shihui mitzvah we don't delay, and mitzvah b'shaita chaviva. Because here we're not talking about the tefillin are mamish in your hands, even though he says b'yada, it means they're available to you. So even here the Alter Rebbe says, even though we're not dealing with the serious rule of ein ma'avirin, it's less serious rules. Nonetheless, they trump the idea of waiting in order to get the tadir first. So it seems like from these halachas, you always want to do the mitzvah ASAP.
Who's the opinion in the middle? He says, somebody who does hold.
No. Yesh loim is you could say, not yesh oimim, you could say. But here's the issue. Look at number 3. This is the well-known steer of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe in Siman Sadik Daled writes in halacha, you're riding on an animal, okay? Can you do Shmoneh Esrei when you're riding on an animal? Or if you're in a car or on a train or anything, you want to... It's already within the time frame of davening. You want to daven now. But in an hour or two, you'll be home, and let's say it's still within this man tefillah, and you could daven there. So Alter Rebbe says you have the right to daven on the train, you could daven on the animal, if you want. Nonetheless, to do a better mitzvah, it's better sheyamtin, wait until you reach your destination to daven there while you're standing. If you know that when you go home, your kids aren't going to make you crazy, then there's no point of waiting. But if it's going to be quiet, and then he says, "Ein bozeh mishum ein machmitzen." So here he throws in the other rule, ein machmitzen, uzrizin makdimin, because miskaven l'kdei l'chayim mitzvah amuvcha, because you have in mind to do the mitzvah better. There's no problem to delay it if you want to do the mitzvah better.
That supports it.
That's a direct contradiction in number 2. In Halacha Dalet he says, even though you want to push off putting on tefillin because you'll do it better by getting the talis first, which is the correct order of operations, no, mitzvah b'shayta chaviv. And here he contradicts himself.
This would support the Leger, the second piece.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what's the answer to this? So the answer to this is, there's a well-known debate between the Radvaz and the Chacham Tzvi. This is the third Radvaz we're mentioning. The Radvaz was asked a famous question. There was somebody that was stuck in jail, and he was given one day that he can go out and do mitzvahs. Go to shul one day. What day should he go? Purim to hear the Megillah, Rosh Hashanah for Shofar Yom Kippur. The Radvaz says today, first opportunity. The Radvaz says, and he uses the words Ein ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. He can't pass over an opportunity. Comes the Chacham Tzvi, who was later, a couple generations later, and he, from a number of proofs, he really wants to disagree. And he wants to say, if you have 2 different mitzvahs at hand, right? The mitzvah here, the mitzvah A that you have is a weaker mitzvah. You're allowed to pass over the mitzvah to do mitzvah B if it's a greater mitzvah. And therefore you want to say this guy in jail would be allowed to pass over a couple months of opportunities in order to get the bigger mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah. What?
He's talking about the same day.
Okay, hold on. So, the Chacham Tzvi wants to say that by 2 mitzvahs, you should pass over the first to get the second if it's greater.
But if they're equal, then you don't.
Yeah, if it's equal, ein mavir. But if the second one's better, you would wait.
Would Shofar be better than tefillin?
It's 2 days.
Not a minion, I think.
Yeah. Talking about a minion. Go to shul. Minion. You know, it could be shofar will have and tefillin will have. If it's just to go to Beis Knesses, maybe you should go on a Tainus day, Yom Kippur. But
See, it's about different days. You could choose
hold on.
different days.
So the Chacham Tzvi continues. The Chacham Tzvi continues. He quotes. He says there are Gemara in Moed Katan that's mashma like the Radvaz. The Chacham Tzvi then says like this. Chacham Tzvi says like this. You know what? When it comes to 2 different mitzvahs, it's debatable. The Radvaz would say you chop the first one. The Chacham Tzvi says my gut tells me you take the second one. But what if it's 1 mitzvah, and you want to push off the 1 mitzvah to do it better later? Says the Chacham Tzvi here, even the Radvaz would agree that you're allowed to push it off to do it better later. It's based on a din of the Trumas Hadesh and about Kiddush Levana. You could already bench the moon Tuesday night. Wait till Motzei Shabbos. Why are you waiting? Says the Trumas Hadesh and Motzei Shabbos, you're in a good mood. And Kiddush Levana has to be done Mitoich Simcha. And the Trumas Hadesh says, if Motzei Shabbos is the last day that you'll be able to do it, it's not worth it. You might miss the mitzvah completely. But if it's safe enough to do it, then push it off, because you're going to do the mitzvah better. So says the Chacham Tzvi, when it comes to 2 different mitzvahs, so then perhaps it's a debate between the Radvaz and myself. But when it comes to the same mitzvah, all agree you're allowed to push it off. Now what's the logic? When it comes to 2 separate mitzvahs, the Radvaz would say, why are you casting away mitzvah A to do mitzvah B? You're insulting mitzvah A. Because mitzvah B is better? That's a bigger insult to mitzvah A, making a chopped liver. But if it's the same mitzvah, I'm not insulting the mitzvah. I'm pushing it off because I want to do you in a better way, a better way. So that distinction, the Chacham Tzvi, would obviously answer this contradiction of the Alter Rebbe. In Hilchos, in number 3, is talking about the same davening. You can daven on the train, daven on the bus, daven on the animal. But you could daven better in 2 hours, so you're not belittling the mitzvah by pushing it off. It's for the sake of the mitzvah. But in number 2, the Alter Rebbe is saying the tefillin are ready. You want to push off the tefillin because you could do talis before. How does tefillin gain by talis being donned before? You gain by doing the correct order of operations. The tefillin doesn't gain. So that would be the answer. So accordingly, when you put this by mitzvahs milah, l'chayr b'lei b'leger was doing nothing wrong. L'chayr here the Chacham Tzvi paskins clearly, by 1 mitzvah, everyone said you could push it off to do it better. Okay. So with this, going back to Rebbe Leibeleger, so until now he was backed up by the Chidushei Harim, who says that Zrizin Makdimin is not an obligation, and the whole day really is the correct Zman. And we saw Reb Chaim Brisker kind of said the same thing. But Rebbe Leibeleger reached out to one of his cousins to help him out. And this is a very important part of the saga. You see, Rabbi Kiva Eger had a daughter who got married and unfortunately was widowed. And then, well, she was widowed from her first husband. And then when she was about 22 years old, a shidduch came up. She should marry someone by the name of Reb Moshe Sofer, the Chassam Sofer, who was almost the same age of her father. The Chassam Sofer was 28 years older than this woman. This woman was born in 1790. Chassam Sofer was born 1762. So what happened was they came to the Chassam Sofer and they said, listen, I want to marry Reb Akiva Eiger's daughter. You know what the Chassam Sofer said? I would love to, but Reb Akiva Eiger probably doesn't want to have an Amaretz as a son-in-law. They asked Reb Akiva Eiger, no, we have a shidduch for your daughter, the Chassam Sofer. Reb Akiva Eiger said, the Chassam Sofer probably wants to have a father-in-law who's a scholar. So the Shadchan says, I have a great idea. The daughter of one Amaretz should marry the other Amaretz. Anyhow, apparently the daughter, it was also the Chassam Sofer's second marriage. The Chassam Sofer's first marriage was unfortunate. He was 25 when he got married.
He was like that.
Well, no, but he got engaged to a woman. After the engagement, the family found out this woman was already married once.
Wow.
She's a widow, no kids. But it was like, no one mentioned this before. So they wanted to convince the Chassam Sofer to break off the thing. So he wrote a letter to his teacher, the great Reb Nosson Adler, and he was waiting for a response. He never got a response. He saw that as a sign from heaven he's supposed to go ahead with the marriage. He did. He was married to her for 25 years, no kids, and she passed away. So by now, he's 50 years old. Reb Akiva Eiger's daughter is 22. She meets the Chassam Sofer first time, apparently it was close to the wedding. So I saw in one place, it was in the day of the wedding when she got a good look at him. You know, he has white hair and everything. She tells her father, Reb Akiva Eiger, the guy's an old man. Reb Akiva Eiger says, quick, get married. He isn't going to get any younger. They got married, 10 kids.
Whoa.
After he was 50, he had 10 kids.
Whoa.
3 boys, 7 girls. So all of his kids, you know, his sons were like 60 years younger than him. You know, it was
Chassam Sofer, right? That was his-
right. So,
Not for the 5th generation.
oh wow, look at that. So, the Chassam Sofer, he had a child. One of his sons, his name was Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon Sofer was a Rav in Krakow, in Mattersdorf and then Krakow, known as the Michtav Sofer. The Michtav Sofer. And Reb Leibel Eiger was first cousins, right? They're both grandchildren of Reb Akiva Eiger. He wrote a letter to his first cousin. He says, help me out. And we have these letters printed. And it's fascinating. We have the letter that Reb Leibel Eiger wrote to him. Reb Leibel Eiger writes like this. He says, people are harassing me. He says, I know I'm right. He says, first of all, he says a fascinating thing. Look at number 1. He says, Rizin Magdimin LeMitzvahs. It should have said, if your zor is, you're Makdim Es HaMitzvah. What does Le Mitzvah mean? So he says, that means if your zor is, you bring something before the mitzvah. You know what that is? The preparation. You're makdim to the mitzvah. You bring something before the mitzvah.
Wow, nice.
He also teaches that you're makdim, you get up early towards the mitzvah. And you prepare. And you prepare. Yeah, you have to get up early. Not just that. When Avram woke up in the morning,
He didn't do the mitzvah right away.
yeah, Avram started chopping wood. He should have done it in the middle of the night. You see from there that the hechsher of the mitzvah is like part of the mitzvah. It's like part of the mitzvah.
Abraham didn't learn Chassidus.
No, that's exactly fakert. Avram felt that the preparation is like the mitzvah itself. Anyhow, and he writes like this in his letter. It's a short letter, it's beautiful. And he says that, you know, the Gemara in Brachos says that the early Chassidim, before they davened, they would wait an hour. Before every tefillah, they would wait an hour to prepare themselves. Says Reb Leibel Eiger, if 2,500 years ago, they needed an hour to separate their minds from what's going on in the Olam Hazeh, to focus what's going to be with us. And not just for tefillah, but every mitzvah. This is what he says. His cousin writes back to him, and it's fascinating. His cousin wrote to him, he writes like this, Cousin, I got your letter on Shabbos, I was so excited. Right after Shabbos, I'm writing back. And he wrote to him a letter on one side of the page. On the other side, he wrote to him something else. And they're both printed in the Michtav Sefer. What he wrote on the front page was for public consumption. On the back of the letter, he wrote a little something between him and his cousin. And he wrote like this. On the front page, he says like this. He says everybody knows that when it comes to one mitzvah, you're allowed to push it off to do it better. And he quotes the Chacham Tzvi, he quotes what we just learned. He says it's a no-brainer, you're allowed to do it. So this Yeshua Heschel Ashkenazi really has no right to offend you.
This guy was an Amoritz.
No. Well, no, because... but he says like this. Says the Michtav Sofer, but what I don't understand is like this. Why do you have to do the milah? Yeah, you tiny that unless you think Chassidus for 8 hours, you can't do the milah. But there's many moyalim in Lublin.
This is in the back of the
Why
page?
does it have to be you? This is the public.
Okay.
Why does it have to be you? Why have to be you? Elamai, you're going to say that when a tzaddik does a bris milah, it's a better bris. As far as the father of the kid might say, yeah, I can give it to Yankel the moil, but I want Label Eger to do it because it's going to be a better bris milah. And I'm allowed to push it off to do it better. And Reb Label could push it off to do it better. Says Reb Shimon Sofer, where did it say that when it comes to a bris milah, the bigger the tzaddik, the better the bris? It's well known the word to the Tzemach Tzedek. He doesn't quote it. Tzemach Tzedek said, when by one of his kids he had 2 moilim to choose from. One of them was an older chassid, and the other one was a specialist, but he didn't know as much chassidus. Tzemach Tzedek said, listen, what you need is the actual cutting. So a similar thing, the Shimon Sofer says, listen, there's plenty of people that know how to do milah in Lublin. Why does it have to be you? So he's really cautious about giving his cousin the stamp. And then he says like this. He says, you know that by my father, your uncle, and by our Zayd, Rebbe Akiva Eiger, the minhag always was to do bris milah first thing in the morning. And he said, you know why? This kid is an oral. He has a foreskin. You're going to leave him an oral because you're busy thinking chassidus? Have Rachmanas in the poor kid. Do it right away for the sake of the kid. And he says that, when we used to daven, when my father and when there was a bris, we davened earlier than usual to get the bris in ASAP for the sake of the child. And you want to do the bris milah, let the kid rot with the milah, with the arla for another 12 hours, God forbid. He writes very sharp.
This is in the back.
No, this is on the front. This is still the front. This is still the front. But he finishes off by saying like this, that I understand it's not just you doing this, there's many people doing this. He says, so I found a raya to support you. There's a medrash that says that when the Yidden in Mitzrayim were getting bris milah, before the Yidden left Mitzrayim, they made a korban Pesach. You can only eat from the korban if you have a bris. So it's the Chazal, they say that some Yidden Moshe they were roasting this lamb, and all these Yidden smelled the shawarma, and they said, well, what's going on? They were told, you got to have the bris. They all had bris milah. It's like someone comes to the kid and says, that's I'm being Megaya right away. Anyhow, so who did the bris? So there's a medrash that says, Moshe did the milah, Aaron did the priya. So wait a second. It sounds like there would have been a line of people waiting. People are waiting for hours to get Moshe to do the bris. Why? He says, Shevet Levi always did bris milah. There were thousands of moyalim. You need Moshe. Apparently, you see, it's worth it to push off the bris milah that it should be done by a tzaddik. So he finishes off, he says, well, based on this, I think you do have a leg to stand on. That, people in the city are allowed to push it off because they want you to do it. And you're allowed to push it off because of the Chacham Tzvi, that to do it better later, you could push it off. That's what he finished. Then it's written in his sefer, the other side of the paper. And he writes like this. He says, the first thing I wrote, that's all true. I'm not backing off of that. However, between me and you, I got to tell you, you might be a holy man. But but when you push off things, people learn from you. And he says you have all these people following you, and they're busy pushing off mitzvahs by the hours, and they are not preparing themselves. They make believe they're great tzaddikim, they don't know what they're doing. He says, don't you know what the Gemara says about Rebbe Akiva? When he used to daven by himself, he davened barichas. When he was in shul, he was finished very quickly. He said, when you're amongst the masses, you have to know how to behave. He said, it's having terrible repercussions. He says, you have all these, it's almost like what happened. Why do we daven Shachris 10 o'clock Shabbos morning? Chassidus before. But instead, what happens is, Mishlafta or whatever it is, some people still learn Chassidus, and we get involved in other things. That's mamash exactly what he writes to Label Eger. He says, you have the right intentions. You're allowed to push it off. But then now everybody's doing bris milah right before Shkia. It's becoming shtus. People are chatzchila saying, I'll do the bris at 4 p.m. for no reason. He says you have to know how to deal with the masses. What you do in private is one thing, but you have a responsibility. He really gives it to him. And then he says, I love this. He says, my dear cousin, they were close. You could see in the letters, it's a rebuke with love. He tells him, you quote the Gemara in Brachas that the early pious people would wait an hour before they daven. So now we have to wait many hours. He says, fakert. The early Chassidim knew what they were doing when they prepared themselves. They would prepare for an hour. We do it right away. We don't even know what we're doing with preparation. We do it right away. And that's what he writes on the other side. So this was kind of an endorsement. But one last thing is that the Reb Leib Leger wrote to another fellow, one of the greatest minds of the time. I guess we'll end with this. Reb Tzadok HaKoyen of Lublin. Reb Tzadok HaKoyen is Yom Mishpachi, was a Koyen. He was born in the early 1820s. He became...
Wrote Laila?
Yes. Yeah. And he actually was an Ishbitz chassid. He went to Ishbitz together. He was also there, exactly. He was with Label. Label was a couple years older than him. And he also, after the Ishbitz had passed on, when Reb Leibel Eger opened up shop in Lublin, he would come. This Reb Tzadok HaKoyen was one of the greatest minds of that time. In fact, when he was older, the Rogatchover was a young man. The Rogatchover traveled to him. And he wanted to speak to him in learning, and the Rogatchover wanted to dazzle him. Reb Tzadok HaKoyen told him, young man, when I was your age, I also wanted to show all the older rabbis I knew how to learn. This Reb Tzadok HaKoyen was an incredible mind, and he was a friend, a couple years younger, but a friend of Reb Leibel Eger. So Reb Leibel wrote to him, please, I need another endorsement. Because even his cousin, most of his cousin's letter was, Yenner endorsement.
Maybe I
He
won't
probably, exactly. Yeah.
He never changed, huh?
But Reb Tzadok HaKoyen wrote to him like this. And this is he says, Reb Leibel, you're right, hands down. And I'll bring a proof. Look at number 5. It's a Gemara, it's a Mishnah in Saita. Yosef was Zoicha to bury his father, and he was the greatest amongst his brothers. Right, Yosef took care of the Kvur, and he was the greatest amongst his brothers. So look at the third line. Milanu Gadol mi Yosef, so it was paid back to Yosef. Because who was busy with taking Yosef's body out of Mitzrayim and bringing it to Eretz Yisrael? It was Moshe himself. And Moshe in turn gave this tremendous cover to Yosef, so Moshe received the honor that the Eibishter himself was buried him. Says Reb Tzadok HaKoyen, Yosef's family could have been responsible for the transport of his body. He would have had many people. Instead, the family gave it up. They said, we want Moshe to do it. Which means having a tzaddik is greater than having the masses. Although we usually say, Barav Am Hadras Melech, Hashem's glory is amongst the masses, you see from here that an individual who's a tzaddik is greater. Because the family of Yosef willingly gave up their opportunity for Moshe to do it. It was a greater honor, which means a tzaddik, although as an individual, is greater than the masses. Now says Reb Tzadok HaKoyen, if you paskin like the Chacham Tzvi, that you're allowed to push off a mitzvah to do it better. And part of that is to push off a mitzvah to have a bigger crowd. In fact, we do that by bris milah. If you have a bigger crowd, you're allowed to push it off because the mitzvah will be enhanced. B'rov am hadras melech is greater than zrizin magdimin l'mitzvahs. And you can push off a mitzvah if you have a bigger crowd. Well, based on this Gemara in Soita, a tzaddik's even better than a bigger crowd. And therefore, having a tzaddik do it for sure will trump the idea of zrizin magdimin. And therefore, he says that everyone in Lublin has the right to choose you as a moil. They don't have to choose somebody else. They know it comes at a price that's going to be pushed off. Everyone's allowed to choose that. Because since you're allowed to push it off for a bigger crowd, and a tzaddik's better than that, for sure you could push it off for a tzaddik. As far as you pushing it off, you're allowed as well, because Reb Leibel wouldn't be ready to do it until later on. And that also goes with the Chacham Tzvi. You could push off a mitzvah to do better later. So ultimately, Reb Leibel Eger was vindicated in his practices to push off the mitzvah to do it better. But the Misnagdim in Lublin really, really gave it hard to him. But with all of these, once the Chidushei Harim wrote, Reb Tzadok HaKoyen wrote, so he kind of, what?
He changed.
Right. There was some others as well. Anyhow, this is one of the Chassidic Misnagdish controversies. It was all centered around halacha. But although the rabbi fought al pi halacha, there were hundreds of people piggybacked and gave Reb Leib Beleger a hard time just because he was a chassid. But ultimately,
So the
the truth triumphs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.